guys, welcome back to my channel. Today, since this hasn't been the best week for me to be creative, we're going to do the mid-year book freakout time, which works perfectly because today we are still in June, because this month is June and that is halfway through the year. I apologize in advance if you hear any weird buzzing noises. There is a fly trapped in my room right now, so we might be treated to his presence every once in a while. First question is, best book that you read in 2020? So for this one, it's kind of like a tie. It's between The Glass Castle by Jeannette and Pachinko by Min Jin Lee. Both of these books opened my eyes to subjects I hadn't really thought about before. Pachinko especially touched upon the wealth of history out there that isn't necessarily taught in schools, considering especially about the Japanese imperialism of Korea. Second question, best sequel you've read in 2020? So this has to be The Wicked King by Holly Black. I didn't read a ton of sequels this year. I actually read this one and then the third book, Queen of Nothing. But I have to say, of the two sequels, this one is the strongest. I remember I was reading this during school, and I was like, okay, well, I'll read like a chapter or two a night. But like I sat down to read only a chapter, and like 20 chapters later, I was like, oh my gosh, I need to go to bed. I'm a huge political intrigue fan, and especially in my fantasy novels, so the great thing about this one is that there's a ton of that, the world gets a lot darker, and I just absolutely love the dynamic between Jude and Carden. Third question is, new release you haven't read yet but want to. So this goes to The Glass Hotel by Emily St. John Mandel. I want to read this. This is kind of a funny story because I picked up her Station 11 in like a secondhand bookstore, and I kind of got so engrossed in it that like 20 minutes went by and I never got the chance to read Station 11 because at that point I didn't have a lot of money with me and I was still in school, so I wasn't able to devote as much time to finding this book at the library and reading it. But I still really want to read both Station 11 and then her newest one, Glass Hotel. So the fourth question is, ignore that. This is 4, that's 8. So the fourth question is, most anticipated release for the second half of the year. That would be The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by VE Schwab. Earlier this year, I read Christopher Marlowe's Dr. Faustus, and I really enjoyed that. I love the Faustian legend, and so it was really nice to read a play about it. So I think it would be cool to read another interpretation of the Faustian legend through an adult fantasy book. Plus, I have enjoyed her other novels, such as the Darker Shade of Magic trilogy and Vicious. My biggest disappointment of this year was The Immortalist by Chloe Benjamin. If you want to know more about why it's a disappointment, you can watch my May wrap-up video, but let's just say that I expected more magical realism than I got. Biggest surprise of this year. For me, that was Eliza and Her Monsters by Francesca Zappia. And the second book was To Kill a Kingdom by Alexandra Christo. Eliza and Her Monsters was actually surprisingly touching, and I think it brings up a lot of important points about fan culture and fan fiction that isn't necessarily addressed in mainstream culture. I mean, I know there's Fangirl by Rainbow Rowell, but I actually haven't read that, so. And then the second book I really loved because it had a great enemies to lovers dynamic, but then it just also had great individual protagonists as well, Lyra and Evelyn. They were both, I thought, really strong characters, and the hatred that they had for each other was kind of, kind of believable. And then their journey from enemies to like reluctant allies to friends and then to lovers, it was just really good. Plus I have a weakness for all things sirens and pirates, so this one was just right up my alley. So the seventh question is, favorite new author or debut to you? I think I would have to go with this one, Taylor Jenkins Reid. I read her The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, absolutely loved it. And because I loved her writing so much and I was so affected by her novel, I picked up another one of her stories called Maybe in Another Life, which is interesting because it kind of follows the idea of every decision you make kind of opens up like a different life for you, a parallel. I think it's the multiple universes theory or string theory, is that every single decision of every single life leads to multiple universes, like spawning off from that first one, so that there are multiple versions of you out there doing different things. While the second book wasn't as good as the first, I still think Reid does a good job of grounding her characters in the reality that she creates, and especially does a good job of building up relationships so they actually seem palpable and real. So the 8th question is your newest fictional crush. I think I'd have to go with Isaac from Pachinko. He's just such a kind-hearted, genuine, sincere man who really sticks to his morals and values. He's so quiet and considerate, and I especially love the relationship that starts to bloom between him and Sanja in the novel. I can't really talk about more, but every time he came into focus in the book, I just was like, I love you. So newest favorite character. This has to be Francie Nolan from A Tree Grows in Brooklyn by Betty Smith. I talk about this more in my May wrap-up, but I really connected with her over her love of books and knowledge and her determination and how much she wasn't afraid to be herself. So the 10th question is a book that made you cry. This one, I don't really cry a lot of books. I get sad, but I don't cry. But I did tear up a little bit at The Martian by Andy Weir. And then a book I didn't cry at, but was kind of really difficult for me to read, was Educated by Tara Westover. If you haven't read this book, there's a lot of difficult scenes of childhood abuse and sibling abuse in this novel. And that was just really powerful and very emotional, but also very hard to read. So question 11 was book that made you happy. So this one was a reread for me. It was Queen of Attolia by Megan Whalen Turner. This book is like a comfort read to me. The whole series is basically a comfort read to me. My favorite book is the one that comes right after this one, The King of Attolia. But I love this book for all sorts of reasons because everything that's good about the first novel, it just amps it up in the second novel. And I love the characters. I love how meticulously plotted and planned all of the novels are. I mean, it takes this woman forever to come out with a new novel. But each sentence in this novel, you know it has a reason to be there. And I especially love how she writes her characters. Every character is complex, including the female characters. Especially the Queen of Attolia, I stan her. But I also stan the Queen of Edis. So it's just really good. So the 12th question is most beautiful book you've bought so far or received, and I'm going to have to go with The Queen of Nothing by Holly Black. I actually didn't buy many books this year because I've been saving money and also because the coronavirus happened and then I didn't really want to go out shopping at all. So this is one of the few books that I bought this year, but you have to admit this cover is beautiful. I really love the color scheme, the broken crown, the black snake. All of it's really great symbolism for what happens in this book, but I also just really love snakes in general, so this is really great. Here is the full cover if you need to see it. And then also, can we just appreciate how beautiful like the hardback is? Oh, it's just wonderful. The last question is, what books do you need to read by the end of the year? So I don't normally do TBRs because that kind of overhead planning, I don't know why, it kind of freaks me out and it makes me like have less motivation to want to read. But there are a couple books that I've been looking at and I'm like, okay, I would love to read these. Some of these books I want to read for fun, others I just want to read to educate myself. So I'll list them off here. So, The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. I'm reading this book at like a buddy read with one of my friends, good friends of mine. So we'll see how that goes. Several books for my own education. Complications, A Surgeon's Note on an Imperfect Science by Atul Gawande. And then also his Being Mortal, Medicine, and What Matters in the End. And then Medical Apartheid, The Dark History of Medical Experimentation on Black Americans from Colonial Times by From Colonial Times to the Present by Harriet A. Washington. And then a couple books that I saw that I thought I'd be interested in reading from looking at BookTube are A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. I'm actually like maybe 77 pages into this novel and it looks really good, but it also is such a behemoth of a book that it's going to take me a while to read it. And then Smoke Gets in Your Eye by Caitlin Doherty. Alright, thanks for watching and I'll see you next time.